everybody. My name is Sylvain Rochon, the engineer paradise, or the paradise engineer. It's getting a bit late, so I'm a little bit tired, but I just wrote an article that it had been circulating in my mind for a while because I've been watching some videos on YouTube, just news, and I've been seeing seemingly more and more videos about racism. And I thought I write something about this, bring a bit of education and reason into it, because racism comes from somewhere. It's not a natural emotion inside people that have everything they need, that are calm and where there's no trouble. Fear actually is what creates racism and other isms, because it's not always about race. And there's a bunch of research about this, so it's kind of exciting and interesting to read and to try to figure out where does it come from. And some of the videos I've been watching, that's what triggered this discussion. So usually it's a white man. It's not always a man, but sometimes it's a lady that talks about the immigrant, talks about this the blacks, or talks about as if it's a plague, as if these people are inferior and we don't want them here. They're taking our jobs. All these discussions, and when confronted with reasonable questions about why, these individuals can't explain themselves rationally, at least without any data. It's an emotional response. And some of them actually seem to have some reasons and some information, but it's all constructed, and they pick and choose whatever information they will support the argument that they're trying to bring up. So why is this? And again, there's significant research about this from psychology. Racism and other isms like sexism and so on and so forth comes from the instinct for people to find a moral high ground. It's like our group, so the group or the social group that whoever they belong to, it doesn't matter what it is. It's because it's not about skin color. It's not about language. It's just like the group you belong to. So if you're a bunch of white people, then that's your group. And then the others. And the others that can be easily blamed. And there's you can blame. They'll use all sorts of arguments to blame because they want to have the moral high ground, and somebody else have to have the low ground, so that they can dump problems that this main group is suffering to the others, and then all sorts of interesting things happen, like we've seen in history, where, like for example, the American Indians in North America were treated as such after a while, and all sorts of problems were dumped onto them, and they became subhumans, to be pushed back, eliminated, not cared for. All sorts of stuff happened. It's the same with Nazi Germany in the case of the Jews and the infirm and the handicapped. There was this moral high ground where the Aryan race were considered, well, they considered themselves, right, as superior. And so whatever happened to these others that were considered troublemakers, where they push all sorts of troubles like an economic problems, social problems on, they were disposable, and it would help everybody else if they did that. And they actually encountered some problems. This is not in the article I wrote, but part of my research is that, for example, in Nazi Germany, the Aryans, some of them saw that a lot of the Jews actually looked a lot like them. So it wasn't about just facial features that where a person would look like a Jew, because some of them looked Aryan. So they had to find they had to justify their behavior. They started looking at what was in their blood, if there was stuff in their blood that was unique to the Jews, to clearly identify and to isolate that group that they wanted to hate and they wanted to be superior to. They wanted to actually justify it no matter what they looked like, because some of them looked like them. the bone structure, and so on. So it's really not about racism. Is not about race. It's just one way to express this idea of creating moral high ground for for your group versus another one. So it really makes me sad when I see somebody that is suffering from one of those isms, because really it's a person that is acting out of fear. You have certain fears, you have certain emotions, and you want to dump it on somebody else, and you're creating these moral schisms to achieve that. So as an engineer and educator, what I'm thinking about is like, okay, well, how do we solve this? Because it's not about just complaining about how human beings feel fear and how they deal with it, because that's exactly what it is. A racist is somebody that is fearful, somebody to be pitied, in my view, not somebody to be angered, to feel anger towards. Well, how do we fix this? Well, the only way to fix it, because this is all emotional, is to make sure the emotions don't appear. And you can't really say to anybody, well, don't feel fear. That doesn't work. It has to come from within. And what's typical with fear, where does it come from? It comes from disinformation or the unknown. So if we see, like, let's use the race card, if we see a culture that is a different color, different language, different culture, and we don't know anything about it, we may be fearful of it because we don't know. And that can create that, racism, basically. It's like, and that moral high ground difference. Just like when the Europeans went to Europe, they saw very, very different cultures, very different technologies that seemed to be primitive, but they were actually not. It was like more advanced agriculture and health in Africa than in Europe. But they didn't have a lot of weaponry, for example. So they were seen as primitive, and very strange cultures and languages and behaviors. And all of a sudden, moral high ground, well, we're just going to grab whatever you have because you are akin to animals. Right? That was the instinct. But that's out of fear, not because of some integrated human sense of superiority versus others that kind of emerges. It's really protectionism. I'm going to protect my clan against this other unknown by creating this schism, and then I can do whatever I want with this other group to keep the fear away. It's pretty neat for the intellectual, but it's really terrible socially, and we see it all the time. It's still all around. The cure to the unknown is information. And that's where things become interesting nowadays, because 55% of the planet is connected by the internet. We get to see all these races, all these cultures, all these languages all the time, and that helps with eliminating some of the fears. Of course, not everybody consumes the same amount of internet, but it does help out gradually over time. People get exposed to more and more of the others, of the differences, and then we get to see more and more of how similar we really are. I mean, there's really decent research, and again, this is all in the links in the article if you check the down below there. Between 99.9% and 99.0%, so there's about a 1% difference here, of our genetic code between any individual you can pick out in humanity is exactly the same. And the only difference between the 99.9 and the 99.0%, there's a little variation, is because what we discovered is that even though we may have 999 out of 1,000 genes that are exactly the same, some of the genes have different number of copies between individuals. So that's what makes the variation. So like just 0.1% of our genes are actually different. But from human to human, the expression of some genes, sometimes you'd have 5, sometimes you'd have 2 of the same genes. So that makes the genetic code as a whole different. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that. Suffice to say, the small visible differences like skin color, eye color, bone structure, only a few genes actually are responsible for these variations that we see, and there's a few variations inside the bodies you don't see, like susceptibility to heart attack and some diseases, or resistances to certain conditions or not between the different people and races and so on. But it's very, very minor. Also, what we know is, like, because this is all about, racism is and fears, this is emotion, that we know no matter what the culture is, how rich, poor, language, and genetic code, we all feel emotions exactly the same way. In fact, there's decent research, a lot of research that shows that if you go, you visit the pygmies in the Amazon, which have never had contact with any other civilization, and you show them pictures of different emotions, like people smiling, angry, they'll identify those emotions as their own, and they'll have exactly the same expressions. The muscles we use when we feel different emotions are exactly the same, no matter what the culture is, and that is actually the impact of how similar we are genetically. We are actually very, very similar. It's just the aesthetics, and then the aesthetics and the differences that we see cosmetically is how the people that are fearful, that are become racists, that's how they try to segregate from different groups. But then all of a sudden, if you appropriate some of these strangers, if you will, into your group because you become friends, because you've had conversations, because you started working with them, and you accept them inside your group, all of a sudden they're no longer part of the others because you understand them. And then they become integrated, and that's how people can free themselves of all these fearful emotions that we call racism and other isms. It hasn't always been a question of color. If you look at, I think it's the 18th century New York, when you had, or 19th century, I think 19th century New York, when a whole bunch of Irish people came in, Europeans, and in New York was all Europeans, but the Irish had to be separated, well, at least they didn't have to. They were separated and considered like second-class citizens, and there was a huge racism towards Irish, but it was white on white. It's not, it's not about color. Racism is really not about color. Now, maybe in these days, it kind of is North America, because of there is different colors between people in Mexico versus African Americans and white and things like that. And these are the visible things that we see. But like I'm telling you, the research is very clear. It's when racism rears its head, it's not really about the color. It's about something else. And so we need more internet penetration on the planet. We need more people on the internet exploring. We need more people traveling. We need more people making friends with people from all over the world. And once you know these individuals that are different from you aesthetically, and they become close to you, you have no reason to fear them at all. And racism goes bye-bye. Anyway, this is not a clean-cut solution that happens like this. This is something that takes time, but we can do a few things to, just like this video, for example, and helping more people go on the internet and not being afraid to talk about it, yeah, expose it for what it is. It's a human reaction, and it's ignorance, it's fear. Those are the things we can deal with. Anyway, that's it for now. Hope you liked it, and I hope you can respond to this and have a discussion. That would be great. Bye bye for now.